working in the HR industry now for around 8 years. So I started working off in the transport and public sector, then moved more into manufacturing and professional services. So I now tend to work with clients across the UK and the globe, private, public and third sector on a range of HR issues. Lots of things in operational HR, but also strategic HR, analytics and project management. My day-to-day tends to be about helping clients with HR strategy, reward and benefit, which is obviously what we're going to be talking about today, some talent management, recruitment, and workforce planning. In terms of what we're looking to cover today, we're going to be having a chat about what is total reward. We'll be thinking about what do employees value as part of your approach to reward as an organization. We'll be talking about a reward theory called Intrinsic and Extrinsic Reward, a little bit about benefit packages and how you should approach a reward strategy as an organization. As we've mentioned at the end, we're also going to run a little bit of a question and answer, but if you do have a question at any time, feel free to pop it in the chat box and we can answer as we go along. So normally for these sessions, I would ask you to keep your phones away and on mute, but for the purpose of today, there are actually a couple of little interactive elements. So I'd really appreciate it if you have a smartphone at hand to deal with the interactive elements of today's session. And we'll be moving straight into those where I want to ask you a question. So you see on the screen a QR code. If you scan that, it'll take you to a website and a page. If that's not working, if you go to menti.com, as you'll see on the bottom, and put the entry code in there, it'll also take you to the same page. And what I want us to have a think about are what is it that you consider as part of reward and recognition in an organization? As you're then submitting all your answers through to us, they'll start appearing on the screen in a word cloud. If you access the link and it takes you to a series of sliders, then you've jumped ahead slightly. So if you can press the previous question button, it'll take you back to be able to submit your answers. So I'm just going to leave this up on the screen for a moment before I switch us over to the word cloud, just to make sure that everyone's had the opportunity to access that and load up the page as required. So we want you to think about what do you consider as reward in an organization? It can be your sort of standard things such as salary, but think wider about what makes you feel recognized in the workplace. There's going to be a really varied range of answers here, and it's going to be good for us to discuss that moving forward. So we're starting to get our first few answers through. So you should see on the screen now some of the things that you're saying starting to appear. Obviously, the more that somebody says something, the bigger the word is going to get. So we've had 5 of you respond so far, so I'll just give a minute for a few more before we run through. It's great to see the variation here, and that's going to really feed in well to some of the things that we're going to be discussing later. What we probably are going to notice is that big blue word in the middle, which seems to be one of the most favorite ones that we've used, which is salary. Ultimately, it is going to be a cornerstone in how you approach reward for your employees across the business. But the key thing to take away here is actually that there's lots of other things as well. Salary obviously is important, but it's not necessarily the most important thing in how we're approaching reward and recognition. We've got some great stuff here. We've got promotion and career development. So we're going to be thinking about some of those internal frameworks, making sure you've got individual development, learning, all those things that can really help. We've got some of the more tangible ones there. We've got health insurance. We'll touch on benefits and benefit packages a little bit later on there as well. I really like praise and say thanks. I think that's something that is so often actually forgotten as part of this reward conversation, we get so struck about sort of the tangible benefits. How much money can we put into people's pockets? What can we do on this? You forget actually some of those more internal things that can really make a difference. I'm sure along the line, we've all held jobs where we think, oh, do you know what? I don't mind working here, but actually there's lots of other things that are missing. Equally, some of us might have had jobs we think, okay, you know what? I'm getting paid at the end of every month. Is this somewhere that I want to be? And moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about those positions and what it looks like. So before we kick on, I just want to see if anyone has anything they'd like to add based on what they've seen on the screen. Is there anything that perhaps someone else has put on here that shouts out to you that you want to talk about? Okay, I think we're looking pretty good on that. So thanks again for participating in that. We'll be touching back onto this app a little bit later on as well to run through another question. I'm just going to bring the presentation back up a second. Okay, brilliant. You should all now see the next slide. So we've touched on there what reward means to you. And lots of this adds into something called total reward. Total reward is the modern approach to rewarding employees as a theory. There's now so much research available showing that employees actually value the non-financial aspects just as much as financial. The balance is continuing to change as well, especially in response to the pandemic, as people are becoming more and more aware of their working conditions. As we've seen from the word cloud, salary is almost always the first thing that comes to mind when people think of reward, but there are two key kinds. So in terms of your salary, you have your base. It's a standard guaranteed cash wage for fulfilling your contract. Based on the industry that you're in as well, you may also have variables. So that's your stuff like overtime, bonuses, profit share, cash rewards. This is something that can be quite unique to you, your organization, the industry and sector that you work in as well. And as we've said, that is a key component of total reward. Bundled with that, we have benefits packages. We'll touch on these in a little bit more detail later on. But benefits packages include things such as discount programs, health insurance, cash plans, and more. Many organizations do implement these. They're a cost-effective way of fleshing out a reward offering, but actually many organizations which implement these don't properly use and advertise them, and don't end up seeing the value. We've got here as well working time and flexible working. So we don't want to confuse this with the flexible working laws and employees' legal right to request change to working patterns. In the context of total reward, looking at this more as thinking about a task-based approach to your working hours. It's about moving away from that relationship of productivity as how long you're tied to your station and more about what you're achieving at the time that you are working. With a good approach to that, the flexible attitude, employees can really feel that they're trusted to get on with their jobs. And we always say that we want to move away from people thinking about a work-life balance. It's more about a work-life rhythm. How can these two things work hand in hand? And is that necessarily tied to the concept of a 9 to 5? We do also consider organizational influence as part of total reward. So influence in an organization is key because what better way to actually make people feel their contributions valued than helping them shape decisions in their organization? Obviously, this remains appropriate based on what they're doing within the business, but as people can grow as part of that career development that we touched on a little bit in the earlier thing, it's about making sure that people see that that is a reward. If you perform well, then you get more of a say in the way things happen. You make a name for yourself, and you're trusted to make decisions moving forward. Before we kick on to the next part, I just want to open the floor to see if anyone's got any questions or comments about total reward. I'm just catching up on the chat as well. So it's great to see some of the things that you put in when we were talking about concepts of reward. I think I agree with you there, Alison, about career development in smaller companies. One of the things that we see a lot when working with clients is the smaller the organization, the more transparent it is, and it's important to be around career development. Those pathways have to become clear. There's less people involved. there's more responsibility sits with individuals. It's not something that can sometimes get a little bit diluted when you're talking with larger organizations. So it's one of those things it's really important to nail when you're considering that as part of a rewards package. So moving on next, I'm going to ask you to grab your phones again and scan the code. If you've already got the page still open, you should be able to pass on to the next slide, and it'll take you to a series of sliders. What we're going to be doing at that point is I've asked you a couple of key things which are commonplace as part of considering reward, and I want you to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 as to how important they are to you as an organization and as an individual as well. So you see on the screen, we've got some people who have completed this already, which is great. You can see 5 responses so far, so I'm just going to give a little bit more time for these to be answered. It's interesting to see some of these key themes emerging. Is there anything in particular that stands out to anyone? Feel free to just unmute yourself and contribute, or pop something in the chat if you'd prefer as well, based on what you can see on the screen. It's absolutely right, Alison. Culture is the top one here. It wins hands down. No matter how well you get your rewards right and your strategy right, culture is the key thing which is going to make people feel valued in the workplace. There are other things which are important, but it's interesting to note just how many of you responded this. So almost 3/4 of people that have responded have put that as one of the most essential things in terms of how they're valued at work. Salary is equally important, as we can see here, but again, a very small number of you have said that actually that is the very key decision in terms of how they approach their reward and value. One of the things that we see so often talked about is actually the relationship between base salary amongst people, younger people entering the workforce. There's lots of conversations at the moment about, well, actually, our time's changing and that base salary is becoming something that's far less important to people entering the workplace. There's a range of reasons behind this that sort of stem from a greater awareness of working conditions, right down to theories that say, well, actually, it's due to the rise in property prices has made housing purchases unattainable for so many people that actually, the idea of having a salary just to pay a mortgage is not necessarily something that's important. But of course, every individual differs. And what we'll see moving through here is most people have put something somewhere across the spectrum. So career progression frameworks, we've got so many of you have said that's something that's really important. Equally to others, it's not particularly. And what I'm hoping that we can get from this is actually that different people value different things in so much ways. It's really important to conduct the right kind of research, speak to your employees, and we'll touch a little bit more on that later on and how best to go about that. Before we kick on, I've got the slide here on intrinsic and extrinsic reward. Anyone got any questions at this point? Feel free to pop something in the chat or just speak up. Okay, I think we'll kick on. So one of the things that I mentioned previously was a reward theory called intrinsic and extrinsic reward. So intrinsic is those non-tangible things. It's based on your job satisfaction and activities, recognition and praise, trust, responsibility, empowerment, some of the things that I've talked about already. Alison, your point there about the best way to deliver intrinsic, In my personal experience, it's that bottom thing there. It's about actionable feedback to improve. Obviously, people respond to this in different ways, but we've had real great success in terms of helping people to develop that job satisfaction from understanding it's not just what they need to do moving forward, where they've succeeded. It's about that full 360 view on employee performance. But I could talk about that all afternoon. We've then got countering the intrinsic is extrinsic reward. These are your more tangible things. Rather than being based on job satisfaction, they tend to be based more on your performance. It's about development, salary reviews, promotions, and bonuses. And sometimes we've got those non-cash tangible gifts as well, events tickets. Depending on the nature of your industry and your sector, it might be something that you choose to utilize as part of your strategy moving forward. In terms of giving recognition and praise publicly or one-to-one, this is something that really depends on the kind of people that you're in the organization. It's about knowing your people well. It's always great to receive public praise and people to see that, but actually that can make some individuals feel slightly awkward. It really depends. They might be one of those people that wants to keep their head down, get on with their job. Equally, it can also be a good way of bringing to attention that someone's doing a great bit of work as well. So I would deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Lots of clients that we work with do tend to operate on both scales there. So they'll publicly have something such as Employee of the Month, or in any sort of regular communications they have with staff, they'll make sure to put a note in there to say, oh, the winner of so-and-so this week, this is someone that's really contributed to a project, helped move the business forward, something like that. And even perhaps for those people that don't like public recognition too often, putting it in there every now and then is certainly going to help. But also that one-to-one recognition is important as well. It makes it more personal. And there's something about someone telling you you've done a good job while they're looking in the whites of your eyes that's just different to reading it in an email or a Teams message. And as the world opens up again and we spend more time in offices and collaborating, that's something that's going to really be key moving forward. So yeah, in terms of establishing and maintaining those equitable extrinsic benefits, there is challenge in doing that in SMEs. It all depends on a range of things, really. We'll touch a little bit on that in one of the later slides about finding that right balance. How do you do this in a way that's sustainable for the business, but also does make you competitive in how you want to do that moving forward? So we'll talk about that shortly. In terms of this explicit theory, it's really important to understand the key difference. Extrinsic motivation, in theory, can undermine the intrinsic motivation. I've talked about that a bit, that if your approach is only based upon extrinsic tangible motivation, you end up with unproductive employees, and you create one of those spaces of, do you know what, I'm only here because I get paid at the end of every month. Not only is that a one-way ticket to unmotivated, bored employees who don't end up being productive, but they also eventually leave the organization. And the other question to have there is it actually ethical to create that kind of space? Obviously, intrinsic motivation is key and more cost-effective, but you can't focus solely on it either. In reality, there are just too many societal and socioeconomic pressures. People take activities that don't necessarily interest them because they've got financial obligations to fill. At the end of the day, we all need to get paid. In terms of how you approach this as an organization, it all depends how you want to fall on this scale. Some organizations, through their nature and their culture, lean heavily in each direction. The way that I would ask you to consider this is think about how perhaps a stock trading and investment firm might approach reward differently to a local charity. It's not just about budget, it's also about the kind of culture of people, what it is that they value. And that's why I've said to you, talk to your employees. Communication is key. You're going to undertake a range of reward research, whether that's general questionnaires and just get a touch point with your people, or if it's just a case of sitting down and saying, well, this is what we offer as a company. What do you like about it? What don't you like? Think about what it is that they want, how that aligns with your wider goals as a business, and consider what it is that you need to get there. One of the things I've talked about as well is benefits packages. These ready-made packages are becoming more popular across the business, and they are something that you need to be considering as part of your playbook. Consider this. Which would you rather see from your employer? Would it be a personalized care package containing some luxury teas and coffees, a couple of locally produced bakery items, and a fancy candle, or an hour's paid overtime? Whilst you might have an initial instinct, everyone's is going to be slightly different. And what you might be surprised to find is if you ask this across the business, the option that's actually likely, probably of lower financial cost, is going to be the one that most people choose. These tangible but non-financial benefits can provide a real cost-effective way of increasing the perceived value of your total reward in the business. Lots of businesses adopt these already. You might have heard of some larger providers, so you've got companies like Health Assured, Perkbox, Westfield, and others. It provides a good, cost-managed way of providing a large quantity of reward and benefits to your staff. You can find something that sits in with the kind of budget you've got for your reward and benefit and find a nice, easy, quick win to add a lot of perceived value to your strategy quickly. That all sounds great, but it's not something that you can just throw money at and hope that it'll be ideal. You'd be surprised how many organizations actually already have benefits packages in place with great salespeople that have implemented something, and actually none of the staff really know a great deal about it. You need to think carefully about considering the implementation of such an approach. If you want to maximize the value you're getting out of it, it has to be paired with a proper communications plan, and often these providers can work with you to develop that and to embed it intrinsically in the organization, whether that's as part of your induction process to show new starters how to use it, right up to making sure that some of your longer serving members of staff know how to get access, putting something up on your intranet. It's also worth considering relevancy. As we've talked about, it sounds like a great idea, but is this actually something your employees would want and would use? Quite often as well, these programs require a base level of technical ability. You have to access them through websites, apps, signing up with email addresses, and it would be worth considering whether you've got the kind of workforce that might actually need quite a lot of significant additional help in order to be able to access these. And will they actually want to access them regularly? I'm going to say it again, communication is key. Find out about what it is that your people want, and by providing them that, or providing a way in which they perceive that's what they're getting, you can really make sure that people stay productive, happy, and that you're bringing the right kind of people into work every day. So this boils down to the question, how do I reward my employees? Getting your reward picture right does ensure you have that happy and productive workforce, but it also makes sure that you're attracting, recruiting, and retaining the top talent you need to help thrive. You need a clear strategy in how you're going to reward your employees. If you approach it in more general, reactive terms, a reward strategy never seems coherent with pay increases here and there. Maybe you throw the odd summer barbecue in there. It's all great on the face of it, but you might not be maximizing the benefit from the time and the money that you're putting in by not thinking carefully about each one of those decisions. Think about how you want to be seen as an employer and how your choice on how you approach reward reflects your image. And that's both internally and externally. Quite often when we think of a company, we have a preconceived notion of what their reward package might be like, because certain organizations might be known as good payers. Others you might think, oh, they don't quite pay what the market does, but it's a great place to work. And that's something that I'd like to do. So we've talked a little bit already about how salary is not necessarily the driving factor in how people feel rewarded at work anymore. But the bottom line of it is salary is and will be for the foreseeable future one of, if not the main measuring point of how your reward strategy is compared internally and externally. You may have the best company culture around, you may offer amazing benefits, holiday, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to bringing people into the business, cash is king. It can also be more prevalent towards the lower end of salary scales. So we work with quite a lot of clients in the manufacturing sector, and you'll actually be surprised how many people are prepared to leave a job for a few pence extra an hour. It's really important to consider your wider competitors, what you look like in the context of that wider reward. And a key factor of getting this right is transparency. There's lots of conversation about should employees really be talking about their salary, and you can certainly suggest that it's something that's made, you preferred it to be kept confidential in the business, but it's protected. Employees have a legal right to discuss their salary, so it's easier to just assume everyone is doing it. With that in mind, you need to be approaching salary decisions in a way that you'd be able to confidently field any questions related to salary between employees. Think about equal pay, contribution, influence in the business. Also, as well, sometimes the external eye of reward consultants can just help review your approach and provide a useful way of measuring how you compare both internally and with the wider market. In terms of making these larger decisions, you have to consider the context of not just your own organization. Remain in touch with the market trends in your sector and industry. Is demand growing? Are you struggling to keep hold of people for financial reasons? Alternatively, do you actually have a glut of applicants and lots of people wanting to come work for you? Maybe that's a sign something's right. It's also often important to consider your location as well. What we always usually think of is London pays a higher salary, but actually it depends on a lot of things. As an example, if you're recruiting for large numbers of entry-level roles, are you aligned with offers from similar employees in the area who, whilst they may not be looking for the same exact people, are looking at the same rough talent pools? For example, here in South Wales, frequent examples of a certain global online shopping firm, which will remain nameless, with a major warehouse in Swansea. You may not have a warehouse, but are you actually competing for the same kind of people? And how does your reward align with that? You need to make sure you're considering intrinsic reward as well as part of this longer term strategy. Good pay and benefits is designed to keep good employees at the business, but ultimately, those staff will want to stay and develop their careers, and they'll reach a point where they're ready to either move on or continue growing within your business. It's key to make sure that your development frameworks are in place. Get the internal easy wins right before taking on more costly reward options where you're looking at salary and other implementations. As we talked about earlier with that slide, culture is key. So get that development and learning culture right. And not only will you have productive employees, but you'll have great potential amongst them as well. So what do you do next? My recommendation is the first thing you do is take some time out to think about your current reward position. What are you paying in comparison to the wider market? What do you offer other than just salary? Do you think your career development and your frameworks are correct? Do you think that's something that meets your wider business goals? Are you in a growth phase where you're looking to quickly develop these teams, or are you looking for some more sort of specific talent management towards more senior positions? Think about your organizational context. Where are you at the moment, and where do you want to be? And how can a strong reward strategy help you with that? Well, the answer there is obviously in terms of keeping and maintaining your top people and attracting the best talent around in the area as well. That also feeds into paying fairly and equally. We do consider that as part of the market, but also think internally about people's influence within the organization, the role that they're doing. As I've said, transparency and communication is key as part of these reward decisions to make sure that your people are remaining happy and productive. And that feeds there into as well the clear career progression model. We've talked about perhaps how in smaller organizations this is even more important because that clear progression model is, there's nowhere to hide. There's a small number of people and it's quite clear when naturally that should flow. But it doesn't matter what the size of your organization is. As individuals, everyone that wants to advance is going to want to understand exactly what they need to do to move to the next stage of their career, both for themselves and for their salary at the end of every month. So hopefully that's been a really good whistle-stop tour in terms of how we are approaching reward, how you can use that to make sure that your people remain happy, motivated, productive, and how you can bring top talent in your business. And now will be a really good opportunity if you've got any questions about anything that I've discussed or generally about HR, reward, and that space, either pop those in the chat box or take yourself off mute and add into the conversation. So in terms of core hours approach, that's something that is getting quite popular amongst businesses. But as you've said there, it does have its own challenges, especially as you're growing more globally. What I would say here, when we face similar issues, both myself working with organizations and working with clients in this space, is understanding that the core hours approach is great in terms of flexibility for individuals, but that it also does come with an element of responsibility for people as well. Core hours has to work for both you and the business, and it's making sure that you set that culture right, that yes, okay, you can work around this time, but actually there are going to be business needs when you are required to work unsociable hours or something that might slightly fall outside of the norm. If you are facing problems in that space, and whether there's specific individuals or whether it's wider as a team, I'm going to come back to that thing again about communication. Just be open, upfront, and honest with the team. Say, there's lots of benefit to this, but this is a struggle that we're having. Come to the team to see whether they've got any particular solutions that they might want to implement. It might be a case that, for example, they think, oh, do you know what? Actually, a rota of someone being able to be available at this time would be something useful. It's about finding a solution that works for both you and the business. Hopefully that helps a little bit there. Andrew, just reading your message now. So in terms of recommending these packages, they can often be things that sit alongside hourly pay. It doesn't have to necessarily be something that is implemented as salary. So for example, many of them just provide a login that you can access. So depending on what hours they work is not really something that would be a driving factor in that. Everyone across organization has the same access to rewards packages. If it's something that you wanted to consider about perhaps how more senior staff in the organization had one compared to less senior staff, then these providers can come up with different plans for you about different levels of access and benefit. So you've got something that sits neatly in line with your budget. Just reading your latest message as well, Alison. Yeah, I think in terms of that rota, that can be quite a useful way of doing it. It's great to have these kind of flexible arrangements, but business needs ultimately has to come first. So I think that is probably quite a solid way of doing it. Lauren, I'm just catching up on your question. Lauren, I would say the key thing that you want to do there, I would potentially recommend working with some of your internal teams to put out a survey. Speak to your staff and say, what is it that they want? Obviously, you're going to get some interesting responses as part of that, but thinking about some of the benefits that might be plausible for you, which is something that is specific and relevant to them. Quite often, especially with overworked teams, it can be difficult to get it right, because what might seem a good gesture and everything seem great on paper, if you're an individual out in the field and you're really struggling and suddenly a message comes through from head office that says, oh, we've implemented that. If it's not something that you very specifically want, it can be easy to take that the wrong way. So again, my recommendation would be to put out something like a reward survey, talk to people about, obviously, you mentioned there about salary, additional holidays, and pay structures. I would also get those intrinsic things right, make sure that you're happy and confident in terms of your career development programs, any learning and development frameworks that might be useful. Make sure you hit the nail on the head and keep it relevant to the staff. And the easiest way to do that is to find out what it is that they would like. So hopefully that's been useful. You've got my email address and my telephone number here. If you do think of any other questions after this session, feel free to just give me a call on that number, drop an email to that address, and I can get back to you with any further advice, and maybe we can have a chat and catch up.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. That was really useful, really interesting. Does anyone have any final comments or final questions? No? That's great. Well, we'll make sure all the forms come out to everyone, and copies of the slides and everything, and we'll catch up with you all again. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, everyone.